What are the most important fantasy football takeaways from the offensive skill players selected in round three of the 2022 NFL Draft? It's time to break it down right here, right now for you as we begin another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer, but I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for SportingNews.com, breaking down your 2022 NFL Draft in depth from a reality and fantasy football perspective. We're going to focus on the latter here, continue to do so on Locked On Fantasy Football. Now, we broke down round one in depth, all the picks, and we looked at all the offensive skill picks there. The running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends who went in round two of the 2022 NFL Draft. Now it's time to focus on round three. So there's just so much action. We had to break up the rounds here for you instead of focusing on just day two in one show alone here. So round three merited its own talk here, especially with the quarterback starting to go off the board again after Kenny Pickett went 20th overall in the first round of the Steelers. So more quarterback talk here and what that means. And then rounds 4 through 7 also had some intriguing picks made there at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. So we'll talk about that on tomorrow's show. So let's get on with today's show in a moment. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We are free and available for you on all platforms. All right, the third round started with a bit of a whimper here in terms of a player selected for offensive skill. We're not, again, talking too much about the offensive line, but we'll do some breakdowns of those offensive lines as they stand closer to the season. But looking at the Bears needed an offensive lineman. They got a decent one on day 3 that I think is sleeper right tackle, but they also needed wide receiver help for Darnell Mooney. It wasn't going to just be Byron Pringle being the main guy here for Justin Fields, or we thought they were going to upgrade, but they got Velus Jones from Tennessee, or Velus Jones, however you say it. What did he do in the combine? Much like Tyquan Thornton, the questionable head-scratching pick for the Patriots in round 2, he ran really fast. He's versatile, so people put a premium on speed a little bit in this draft at wide receiver, which they always do, but got to look at some other aspects as well. And Velus Jones is a big reach for me for the Bears. I don't think it really helps Justin Fields' fantasy football value all that much. It doesn't really take pressure on Mooney if you're relying a lot on Pringle right now with that Allen Robinson. So really tough spot here for Velus Jones. I don't love, again, the offense and the direction here right now, the new coaching staff there as they make the transition. It was tough to botch it or feel less inspired than we did with Matt Nagy working with Justin Fields. But right now, the Packers like offense. I'm not quite sure what they're doing. Remember, the Packers didn't have all the greatest history drafting wide receivers for their scheme here. So Velus Jones, a little bit of reach. I don't see him on the fantasy football radar at all. And I'm really disappointed. I think this could be just a wasted pick overall for the Bears when we look at it going down the line. Now, we look at the next pick here, and the Colts, we talked about their pickup of Alec Pierce. I thought it was a really good draft pick to complement Michael Pittman. The other big question mark they had was they lost Jack Doyle to retirement. Surprised them a little bit, but Doyle was up there, taking some wear and tear. They brought back Malik Cox, but you need to get a little bit of juice for those two tight end sets. I do like Jelani Woods, the pickup from Virginia they got. I think he stood out a little bit because of the athleticism there. We saw Trey McBride out of Colorado State go because he was the best all-around tight end. So Jelani Woods went because he's just a dynamic athlete and has some upside. And the Colts could stash this type of player. Again, Malik Cox is pretty good. He does what they need for him, short to intermediate, work the red zone. But this, again, as we mentioned with the Pierce pickup, Ed Hart is a 3 wide receiver team. They want to have big plays here. They need Paris Campbell healthy, Pierce and Pittman working together. So tight end is not going to be as big a factor. Again, this is a team that operated pretty much about 75% of the time with 3 wide receiver, 11 personnel sets there. So when you look at that, Woods is a depth play. He's an upside play. It was good to go in that direction post Doyle. But again, he's a guy, in most tight ends in general we look at, they need 2 years before we feel comfortable putting him on the radar. And we even saw that to some degree with Kyle Pitts as a top tight end last year. We had to temper expectations. I think he'll do much better this year. But Woods has that kind of athletic upside in this passing game, and Frank Reich and the Colts know how to use tight ends well. So we'll see how it works out if he's the next Zach Ertz or Dallas Goedert to help them in this passing game. For now, Matt Ryan under center. Speaking of Matt Ryan, his old team drafted a quarterback, and the Falcons got back on the quarterback train here in round 3 after none were taken in round 2. The second guy off the board, however, was not Malik Willis. It was Desmond Ritter of Cincinnati. And why they took Ritter probably makes a lot of sense. They have Marcus Mariota, because Mariota and Ritter are very profile similarly here with what they can do. They're both good leadership quality guys, did big things with their teams, led them to chances to win national championships. Both didn't quite finish there, but athletic, good arm, can do all the things well, very smart, very seasoned. So Ritter's in a great spot to learn from a good guy. Marcus Mariota, look, he hasn't worked out as well with the Titans. The Raiders didn't really give him a chance behind Derek Carr. But we know Marcus Mariota is one of the nicest guys in the NFL. He's going to help. Nice also could mean that he's in a tough spot competing potentially for Desmond Ritter for the starting job under Arthur Smith. I think what's going to help Mariota is that Arthur Smith and him go back a long way in the Titans offense. So that's probably going to help in short term get the bridge job here. But look at the Falcons. I mean, they have some potential there, this offense. Even without Calvin Ridley, you add Drake Jackson there to replace Ridley. You have Olamide Zaccheaus. You have Zach Pitt, or looking at Zaccheaus, and you also have still Kyle Pitts in the mix, as we mentioned, even though you don't have Russell Gage anymore. So Falcons do have some passing options. Again, Mariota could run a little bit, so could Ritter here in this offense. So keep things in mind. Again, Ryan was a QB 20 last year, so not too far off in a deep league option there as a borderline streamer or QB2 that we look at. So something to keep in mind here with Desmond Ritter. But I would think for right now, Marcus Mariota is going to be the starter there. Continue to do so for 1 more year at least, or 1 year at least. They're taking over for Ryan initially. Again, with that familiarity in the offense, the way they want to run it, run heavy, play off that a little bit. I think that's what you'll see. And at some point, maybe Ritter making starts and Mariota have more durability issues or fade a little bit. I can see that transitioning happen in the second half of the season. All right, so that was a good start here with the 3 picks that we're looking at there from the offensive skill side in round 3. We still have to talk about 10 more. We'll talk about those guys in our final 2 segments here on Tuesday on Locked On Fantasy Football. BetOnline.net is your number 1 source for all your betting stats and sports information. Look, I went there before the draft. You had USFL games there that you could check out. It's also been exciting that we have basketball in full swing with the NBA playoffs, Major League Baseball into its second full month here. And don't forget NHL playoffs around the corner, as well as was big other non-stick and ball events, including boxing and UFC, and of course the Kentucky Derby this weekend. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news there at BetOnline for your playoffs on the hoops floor or ice, and looking at MLB as we go full swing with that season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today, betonline.net, or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let us continue the show here on Locked On Fantasy Football on Tuesday. We're breaking down here for you round 3 and the offensive skill picks of the 2022 NFL Draft. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We are free and available to you on all platforms. All right, let's go to the Broncos pick, and they need to replace Noah Fant. They traded him away in the Russell Wilson deal, so Fant is now in Seattle. Broncos had Albert O there, but he's been a little bit durability question mark here. I think he's a special player. This kind of clouds his value a little bit because Greg Dulcich of UCLA, very dynamic athlete. He's kind of a wide receiver, tight end hybrid. So he can actually really cut into everyone's value, including Jerry Jeudy. He figures to be in the slot between Tim Patrick and Cortland Sutton here for Russell Wilson. But Wilson has never been a big tight end throwing guy, and now having a little bit of split between Albert O and Dulcich could dull the value here on either side. And again, we told you the tight end class, the value wasn't that great to begin with, and then there were some really bad landing spots. So really one tight end landed in the ideal landing spot, but everyone else a little bit more questionable. So Dulcich can be a special player, a nice extra cog to have for Wilson right away as a rookie there in this passing game, but we got to wait and see. There's a lot of mouths to feed. Again, between those 3 wide receivers, Javonte Williams, out of the backfield. And Albert O, we'll see where Dulcich fits in. He could be kind of a special package 12 personnel playmaker for them. But beyond that, we'll have to see. He's not the greatest blocker either for Denver. And now we go to another quarterback. This was very intriguing. I think Ryan Tannehill is still going to be starter in Tennessee, but the Titans jumped on Malik Willis like they should have. It was about time a team looking for the future did that. Again, the thought is that Malik Willis, he's not quite ready, but he's got a massive arm athleticism ceiling here once he gets a little bit more polished, making the transition from small school Liberty to a more complicated NFL playbook. I think it's coming. Willis is also quick, steady, extremely intelligent, very tough mentally and physically here as well. So he's going to be fine picking up an offense very quickly. So I think a lot of teams are going to regret passing on him. The Titans are going to like taking him because Ryan Tannehill, we saw in that playoff game against the Bengals, he just doesn't have it. We've seen also his decline. He started as just a gangbusters fantasy football QB in taking over from Mariota in Tennessee. But then what we saw all of a sudden was, again, his physical limitations. He's just not the greatest player. He's a little dependent on the running game and playing off that and throwing downfield. He was hurt a lot by A.J. Brown not being in the mix and being on the shelf last season. So that dropped Tannehill from QB 7 in fantasy in 2020 to QB 13 in fantasy in 2021. So he's going to have to get used to being without A.J. Brown here. As he's gone, Treylon Burks, the rookie from Arkansas, replaces him. They bring in Robert Woods to replace Julio Jones, Austin Hooper to replace Anthony Ferkser. Their offensive line is still pretty good. Derrick Henry in the running game is still the bread and butter of what the Titans want to do. But Willis is in position to play off that better with his big arm. Again, he can throw it downfield, play off Henry well, also give them a complementary non-traditional runner with Henry. So that's coming in time, and we'll see if Henry can hold up. They did draft a backup to Henry in this class as well. But look at Malik Willis. It's as best as he could hope for. This is a place definitely where he can take over as a starter and put himself in the fantasy football radar in 2023. Tannehill, they can get out of the contract then. It's a little bit tied and tight right now for the Titans with their whole money situation. This is why they had to part with A.J. Brown in the first place. But Malik Willis in a good landing spot. If he was going to be in a bona fide starting situation here for this season, he was best off landing with a team that he could start for next season. That's definitely the case with Malik Willis. So excited about this pick. Again, we have to table it. We might see Willis get some chances. However, Tannehill struggles. Maybe the Colts win this division there, and that maybe pushes Tennessee to make a change sooner rather than later, much like we saw the Colts not making the playoffs with Carson Wentz and making the quick change to Matt Ryan in a more veteran sense here. This would be a more veteran to rookie transition for the Titans. But again, Malik Willis, a very good pick here for Tennessee this late in the third round. Then we had the Cowboys there. They took Jalen Tolbert. We know they moved on from Amari Cooper, traded him to the Browns in the offseason. So what happened is you moved up everyone. CeeDee Lamb is a dominant number one here. Michael Gallup coming off the injury last year, trying to hold up as a big play number two on the outside. Then you lose also Cedric Wilson, who they really liked, filled in pretty well. So Jalen Tolbert kind of fills the role of Cooper and Wilson a little bit in this offense, giving them that extra guy to put in now their 11 personnel. But keep in mind, the Cowboys could pivot to more 12 personnel. They did invest in bringing Dalton Schultz back. They also drafted a tight end that can complement him as an inline blocker later in this draft. So you could see a good mix of 11 and 12 personnel. So Tolbert, I think we'll have limited success, just like we saw earlier. I mean, it's not, I don't think, a situation you can translate to what you had with Lamb, Gallup, and Wilson. It's more a situation you would translate when you had Cooper, Gallup, and Wilson there in the mix. So, again, Tolbert, we're going to temper our expectations again. Clearly, the three top mouths to feed in this offense in the passing game are Lamb, and then Schultz, and then Gallup. So Tolbert is going to be distant fourth in that mix here for Dak Prescott. All right, the next offensive skill pick we'll talk about. This one was a bit of a head scratcher. Rashad White, the running back out of Arizona, he ends up in Tampa Bay with the Buccaneers. And why this is curious is the Bucs decided to keep Leonard Fournette. They also kept Giovanni Bernard, and they have Keyshawn Vaughn. Remember, he ran pretty well when those guys were not available there down the stretch. So Keyshawn Vaughn just waiting and waiting for his chance. Maybe the Bucs don't really like him, much like they didn't like Ronald Jones. They move on from Ronald Jones. Remember, they were this deep last year. Basically, Rashad White replaces Ronald Jones, but Jones had a significant role there playing off Fournette. Well, Bernard has a pretty dedicated role as a receiver here when needed to help Tom Brady in that capacity. You also have, again, Keyshawn Vaughn, who can do a little bit of everything as a young swing backup, and Fournette being the alpha here with some feature tendencies back again from his days in Jacksonville. So Rashad White, just a depth guy. I'm not too excited about this pick again in third round. good depth pick. I think it was the best player maybe available to them at this point. But again, that's all you're looking at with Rashad White, and not a very good spot at all for any fantasy football value. Neither was the selection by the 49ers, but you got to talk about it a little bit. It's Ty Davis Price. They're out of LSU. Just a random running back pick. They reached the third round, especially after they stole Elijah Mitchell there, fifth round last year. They also had a pick that they used on Trey Sermon. So the 49ers picked two running backs last year. Sermon got doghoused a little bit. They were disappointed with him. And then he got hurt, but he's still a pretty nice talent who fits their scheme pretty well. Davis Price does fit their scheme well. I mean, I cannot fault Kyle Shanahan. He's good at identifying backs for that zone blocking scheme and plug and play guys. We go back to Matt Breida, Raheem Mostert. Now, both those guys are gone, but Jeff Wilson Jr. is still in the mix. So, Jermichael Hasty. So, how many running backs do the 49ers really need between, again, now when you look at Mitchell and Hasty and Wilson and Sermon, now you have Davis Price. I just didn't get it at all with this pick. So, pretty good runner overall. And we know the Shanahan mottos. Somebody leads the team rushing randomly for one season, it'll be a different guy the next year. So maybe that's what they're trying to do with Davis Price, but you could just easily be Jeff Wilson or Trey Sermon being the leading rusher here for the 49ers. So really tough, bad pick here, I think, for the 49ers for their first offensive entry in this draft after taking the pass rusher Drake Jackson out of USC earlier. That was a good pick. This was not, and neither was their pick to close round 3. We'll get into that in our final segment. All right, we are almost through our analysis of the round 3 fantasy related offensive skill picks here in the 2022 NFL draft. We do have 5 more guys to get to, as I mentioned. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by Rock Auto. With ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Wind or often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning, and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry. You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose spend 30, 50, and 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? They're always helping me out. I got a Honda Accord there that's getting up there, but still solid. I've got a Ford C-Max Energy, a hard car to find parts for. They're going to take care of you like they took care of me at Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for more than 20 years. And Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you can need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. So go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com. That would be their website right now, and see all the parts available for your car. Right, Locked On in their How'd You Hear About Us box, and they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. You can find them all at rockauto.com. All right, it's time to close our look at round 3 of the 2022 NFL Draft from a fantasy football perspective here on Locked On Fantasy Football. That's what we do. And we're up to another quarterback. So the third quarterback taken in the third round here goes to the Carolina Panthers. So all these teams, the Falcons, the Titans, the Panthers, all these teams attach quarterbacks in the first round. There was the Kenny Pickett off the board, get quarterbacks in the third round. They get Matt Corral. He's actually their second pick on the board after getting Ike Ekwonu. The offensive tackle there should start opposite Taylor Moton there for Panthers. So they get Matt Corral. So they said they were going to get some type of quarterback, whether it's going to be Baker Mayfield, Jimmy Garoppolo from the outside, or a young quarterback to compete with Sam Darnold. Well, it turns out he is Matt Corral. So, this is not crazy. Matt Corral may have been mocked to the Panthers early, like in the process where Corral was a first-round pick, when Ritter was a first-round pick, when Willis was a first-round pick. But Pickett ends up being the only guy here. So take your time, get your value. Panthers, with their second pick in this draft, end up with Corral in the third round, near the end of the third round. So Corral has some upside, athleticism, arm is there. Got to figure some things off the field, on the field, get polished here to be right here to really compete with Sam Darnold. Right now, Darnold would be the favorite to continue to be a veteran bridge for this team. If Corral doesn't work out, they'll think about taking quarterback high. There, we mentioned C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young sitting there in next year's draft. Maybe Spencer Rattler also plays himself into first-round pick again in South Carolina. So, again, Corral, we'll see. They're taking a shot at his upside, and don't sleep on Corral winning the job outright over Sam Darnold in camp. Remember, third round is the Russell Wilson round. So Ritter, Willis, Corral, don't sleep on these guys, having pretty good value going forward. All right, let's go to the Commanders. This was a head-scratching pick. I didn't get it all. Brian Robinson, the power back. He's a power back. He's a beast. He's kind of the Derrick Henry light, the latest guy in the Crimson Tide rushing offense to be in that profile here. So you look at Commanders and what they got in Robinson. Again, you have Antonio Gibson. He's their feature back. You bring back J.D. McKissick. Jarrett Patterson gave you some good production, including a very nice game filling in for Gibson last year. So why did you need to get Brian Robinson? I'm not quite sure, but maybe they want to pivot their offense a little bit more power back sensibilities here. Gibson is more of that hybrid we know, wide receiver running back type. McKissick, so it's very complicated. It muddles up this Commander situation even more. It was disappointing enough to see McKissick eat into a lot of Gibson's touches last year in the passing game until McKissick went down and they unleashed Gibson the way they should have. And then you saw Gibson get hurt a little bit with a shin injury, play through it. It wasn't as effective. So maybe they're working for the durability, get a power back, but let's not hope Robinson eats into the power situations, especially the touchdowns and all the good stuff there that Gibson can give you to try to be an RB1. So again, very curious pick with Robinson. We'll see how it pans out between him, Gibson, McKissick, and Patterson. All right, let's look at the Browns next. This was a better pick for the Browns, I think, than what the Commanders did before them in this round. You get David Bell out of Purdue. Now, I love this kid. I think he's a good style of player for what they need right now because look at the way they stand. Donovan Peoples-Jones is your big play threat. There's no doubt about it. That's what he does. He's going to be kind of the Will Fuller type for Deshaun Watson. Then you have the alpha, the DeAndre Hopkins type for Deshaun Watson in Amari Cooper. So what do you need? You need that third big playmaker. And I think what I like about Bell is he's a guy that can play in the big slot. So he was compared a lot to Juju Smith-Schuster. There was a talk that the Steelers would take him instead of the Pickens, but they kind of like Pickens' versatility a little bit more, I guess. But Bell, I think, is going to best serve them as a big slot, good hands, pretty strong. Not necessarily the guy that's going to dominate with his speed downfield and get vertical, but with his quickness in the short area after the catch, he's got some good bursts there. So really like this pick of David Bell, opposite of what they had in Rondell Moore. It's kind of a bigger target coming out of Purdue. Again, good compliment. He should be in position to be the number 3 right there. They should be 11 personnel-wise. Now, another comparison I made at sportingnews.com is there's a bit of Adam Thielen in this player, which is important because Kevin Stefanski is the guy calling the shots for the Browns, offensive-minded, and was with Minnesota, got the best out of Thielen. So that tells you something here. If Deshaun Watson can rise up all these values here at wide receiver, watch out for Bell being a big touchdown threat initially and then rounding out into a little bit more complete receiver, playing off Peoples-Jones and Cooper. So excited about this pick, excited to see what he can do with Deshaun Watson. Now, we talked about the Cardinals taking the top tight end on the board, Trey McBride, and putting him with 2 more veterans there, Zach Ertz and Max Williams. Well, the Jets didn't have a very good tight end room last year. They moved on from Ryan Griffin, but they did get aggressive in free agency, signed Tyler Conklin, who had a good year with the Vikings, filling in for Irv Smith Jr. CJ Uzama made a lot of big plays for the Bengals for Joe Burrow last year. So they add Uzama, they add Conklin, and then they also had Jeremy Ruckert out of Ohio State. So weird to just completely go deep in the tight end room. So Ruckert, however, not in a very good situation. We have 2 guys that are capable and had their fantasy football moments there as receivers last year. Conklin a little bit more down the stretch, filling in for Smith, and Uzama, who was a blocker type here and produced in certain games. You remember that Ravens game where they couldn't cover him and he went off. There's certain situational things there. But now you have the Jets adding a third tight end. Again, when you invest good free agent capital, it's kind of like drafting a tight end if you're the Patriots last year and it kind of killed those guys that they had. Dalton Keene and Devin Asiasi when they picked up both Joni Smith and Hunter Henry last year. So this is kind of the situation with the Jets. Ruckert, there's no chance he's going to be the new George Kittle in this offense, especially with Zama and Conklin. So tough spot there for the Jets as they went offensive skill again here after taking Garrett Wilson, the wide receiver, and Breece Hall, the running back. This one is a little bit of meh offensive skill pick to add in the mix. It's really their worst pick and their only really bad pick of this draft for New York, who gets an A+ for their efforts. Now, let's go to the last pick in this round. We said the 49ers topped themselves in the bad pick of Ty Davis Price out of LSU. Well, they took Danny Gray, a wide receiver out of SMU. I didn't get this pick at all. Like, if they had maybe dealt Debo, I'd maybe feel okay about the 49ers going after wide receiver, but then again, he probably would have been a first-round pick, but I didn't get this pick at all. This is a run-heavy offense. Got pretty good depth now with keeping Debo Samuel, Brian Ayuk, Jawan Jennings. You have multiple tight ends there. You run first team again I didn't get it. I think Danny Gray and Davis Price were more pet project type picks there for Kyle Shanahan, and he did that all the way through the bottom of the draft and getting the kid Jason Poe signing him as an undrafted free agent. He's kind of a fullback guard hybrid that they signed. So sometimes Shanahan can get too cute. He likes his offensive skill, and we know he got too cute there in that Super Bowl when it was 28-3. So some of that is a bad tendency that they can have. I don't think they need Danny Gray at all. It's a terrible landing spot. Also, big reach for Gray in this position. So 49ers do a lot of great things. They've built a great team. They're a NFC champion. They were NFC runners-up last year, but they didn't do really well in this draft. And maybe it's okay because they did pretty well in free agency, and they're pretty much set from last year's draft as well. And made some nice picks there earlier with Nick Bosa, and now Trey Lance, I think, is going to be a great pick for them. So there are a lot of mistakes with Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch and Davis Price and Gray. I didn't get these picks at all for a team that has a status as a contending team in the NFC. I don't think either of these players really help with any impact in reality or fantasy for them, and maybe not ever in San Francisco. All right, there's a breakdown of those picks there from the third round. These are really all the offensive skill picks. We'll do a little bit more rapid fashion as we find all those players there in rounds 4 through 7 who went on the offense side of the ball, and maybe also look at some special teams guys that also went. So we'll break that down there on Wednesday to get through the middle of the week here in Locked On Fantasy Football. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Now make Locked On NFL your second listen. The schedule may be dark, but the NFL never stops, and neither does Locked On NFL. There is the schedule release next week, so make sure you're on top of things there. Locked On NFL on the network. You can get insight and opinions from hosts including Ross Jackson, Chris Carter, and Tony Wiggins, plus local Locked On NFL hosts repping all 32 teams around the NFL. There's no offseason for real fans, so make sure you're subscribed to Locked On NFL on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, as well as Locked On Fantasy Football on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. So a lot of good stuff for you all throughout the offseason. We never stop bringing it to you here, breaking down the NFL and fantasy on the Locked On Network. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer. Have a great day, and we see you tomorrow as we wrap up our 2022 NFL Draft look with our breakdown of the offensive skill picks of rounds 4 through 7.